"You're not family," he said, with a smile as cold as marble. "Dad left everything to me." But then the lawyer leaned forward, opened the envelope, and said, "Well, we'll get there." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. And now, let me tell you who I am and how I ended up sitting at a long oak table across from the man who thought I was nothing. My name is Linda Harrington. I'm 68 years old. I was married to Gregory Harrington for 20 beautiful, turbulent, imperfect years. Until his heart gave out in his sleep 6 months ago, and just like that, I became the widow. But to some, I was never truly anything at all. Not even a wife. Not even a name on a family tree. Just her. That morning, the morning of the will reading, I had already prepared myself for the worst. Because Gregory's only son, Ethan, had made his intentions very clear at the funeral. Standing by the gravestone, surrounded by people in black, he leaned close to me and whispered something that still rings in my ears. "Hope you packed your bags already. The house? The company? They're all mine now." He had said it like a threat, like a joke, like a victory lap. And I had said nothing. I had simply adjusted the collar of my coat and walked away. Because I knew something he didn't. But let me back up a little first. Gregory and I met when I was already in my mid-30s. He had just lost his first wife, and I had been divorced for nearly a decade. We were both broken in different ways, and for a while, it felt like we were the glue that kept each other from falling apart completely. Gregory built bridges, literally. He was a civil engineer whose firm had designed the main overpass through the city. His name was on the bronze plaque near the courthouse. Mine wasn't. That was the story of our life together. I was always nearby. Always supportive. Always quiet. When Ethan came into the picture, he was already 15. Old enough to resent me just for existing. He never said it directly to my face, but I could read it in the pauses, in the silence at dinners, in the way he said "Dad" like a weapon every time he wanted to remind me I wasn't blood. And over the years, nothing changed. When Gregory and I moved into a new home together, Ethan said nothing. When we celebrated anniversaries, he rarely showed. He never once asked me how I was doing when Gregory got sick. But I stayed. I stayed because I loved his father. And because Gregory kept saying, "Don't worry about Ethan. He'll grow up one day. He'll see." He didn't. And now here we were. Sitting at the office of Peterson and Clark, waiting for the envelope that would supposedly give Ethan the keys to the kingdom. He looked smug. Dressed in a navy suit that was just a little too expensive. His arms crossed like he already owned the room. "Don't take it personally, Linda," he said, not even pretending to whisper. "This is how it was always meant to be. You know, real family gets the real inheritance." I said nothing. Just smiled. The same way I always had. You'd be amazed what a well-timed silence can do to a man who expects you to beg. The lawyer entered, Mr. Clark, a man in his late 60s with a kind face and sharper eyes. He greeted me first. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, nodding. Then turned to Ethan. "Mr. Harrington." Ethan looked like he was about to pop open champagne. The lawyer cleared his throat, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it in front of him. "I know you're eager," he said to Ethan, "but I think you'll want to hear this carefully." And then he read. The room fell into silence. You could hear the leather of the chair creak beneath me as I shifted. But Ethan, he didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Because what came next would change everything. They always said I was quiet. That I stayed in the background. That I didn't make waves. They were right. But they also mistook my silence for weakness. They thought I didn't know how things worked. That I was just a shadow behind a man like Gregory Harrington. But the truth is, I watched everything. I remembered everything. And now, I am the last one holding the truth. Let me take you back to where this story truly began. Not at the will reading. Not even at the funeral. But on a quiet afternoon 3 years ago, when Gregory coughed and didn't stop coughing. I remember sitting on the porch with him. His hand covering his mouth, his shoulders shaking slightly. I handed him a glass of water, and when he took it, I noticed something. His fingers trembled. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. The invincible man I had loved for 20 years was starting to fade. Gregory was never the romantic type. But when the diagnosis came, pulmonary fibrosis. He looked at me with a kind of raw vulnerability I hadn't seen in him before. "I don't want Ethan to destroy what we built," he had said one night. It was late. He couldn't sleep. Neither could I. He didn't say it with anger. More like disappointment, regret. He told me things I didn't know. How Ethan had borrowed money against the company's name. How he had been quietly selling company vehicles and skimming profits. How Gregory had covered it all up, not because he agreed with it, but because he wanted to protect Ethan from jail. "It's my fault," he admitted. "I kept hoping he'd change." I didn't say much. Just sat beside him and held his hand. That was all he needed. Months before he passed, Gregory gave me a manila envelope. He didn't explain it fully, just said, "If anything happens to me, give this to Clark. And don't let Ethan anywhere near it." Inside were documents I never dared open. I knew better than to snoop. But I knew they mattered. Over the years, I played the role they wanted me to play. I hosted the charity events. I designed the interiors of our offices. I answered calls at the front desk when no one else would. I even taught the interns how to write proposals, quietly, without credit. When Gregory's company was featured in the business journal, Ethan's name was on every page. Mine wasn't even in the acknowledgments. But I smiled for the cameras anyway. Because I wasn't doing it for credit. I was doing it for Gregory. For the man who told me every night, "I couldn't have built this without you." But Ethan hated me. Not because I wronged him. Not because I stood in his way. But because I existed in the space where his mother once had been. He never said it. But I knew. He never accepted me. Even when I cared for his father during his last months. Even when I sat by Gregory's hospital bed every night while Ethan sent one-word replies to the nurses. When Gregory passed, Ethan didn't cry. He didn't speak. He only asked one thing. Did he leave a will? And now, here we were. Back at the office of Mr. Clark. The air heavy with expectation. Mr. Clark pulled out the sealed envelope. Ethan leaned forward, grinning like a man about to claim a kingdom. But before he opened the envelope, Mr. Clark paused. He looked directly at Ethan. And said, in that calm, measured voice lawyers use when they know something others don't. "You might want to sit down, Mr. Harrington. Your father made some last-minute adjustments." Ethan blinked. "What are you talking about? I already have a copy of the will. Dated 3 years ago." "Yes," Clark nodded. "And then he updated it. Twice. The final version was signed and notarized just 5 weeks before his passing. That's the one we'll be reading today." The grin vanished from Ethan's face. He sat back, slowly. His eyes darted to me for the first time, not with mockery this time, but with something else. Doubt. Maybe even fear. You could hear the sound of the seal breaking as the lawyer tore open the envelope. The soft whisper of paper sliding free. The beginning of the end. There was a reason Gregory had waited so long to change the will. He wanted to believe Ethan could change. He wanted to die thinking his son would one day be worthy of the empire he built. But in the end, he chose to protect it. From Ethan. And for me. The sound of paper rustling had never felt so loud. Ethan leaned forward like a man bracing for applause. I leaned back like a woman preparing for a storm. Mr. Clark adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to read from the will. His voice was calm, rehearsed. Mine was quiet, but my heartbeat wasn't. "This is the last will and testament of Gregory William Harrington. To be read in full, in the presence of my wife, Linda Harrington, and my son, Ethan Harrington. May these words bring clarity where there has been confusion, and peace where there has been conflict." I glanced at Ethan. He was trying to look relaxed, but his fingers were curled tight around the arm of the chair. "To my son Ethan, I leave the Harrington house on Willow Lane. The home I purchased before my second marriage. The place where he grew up. May it bring him comfort, or a reminder of where he came from." Ethan gave a short, smug smile. Like he'd just won a small bet. But the next line made his shoulders tense. "I also leave Ethan 15% of the shares in Harrington Developments. These shall be non-voting shares, with no executive power. A gesture of inclusion, but not of trust. I hope in time, he earns more than what I've written on paper." That was it. No private jet. No summer home in Capri. No keys to the kingdom. Just a single house, and a small symbolic seat at the table he had always assumed he would one day command. Ethan blinked. I could see him doing the math in his head. 15% of a company is something, but not when the remaining 85 is in the hands of someone else. Mr. Clark turned the page. And then he read my name. To my wife, Linda Harrington. My partner in all things. The one who stood beside me when I was sick. Who never asked for credit but always deserved it. I leave the following. Ethan shifted. That fake smirk was fading. Quickly. All remaining shares of Harrington Developments. Full control of the company's executive board. Our estate in Newport. The family yacht, the vineyard property in Sonoma. All liquid assets in our joint and personal accounts. My art collection. And the contents of the safe deposit box at Liberty Bank. Ethan stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous, he snapped. This isn't what he told me. He said I'd be in charge. This isn't fair. Mr. Clark didn't flinch. Mr. Harrington, your father updated this document while in full sound mind, witnessed and notarized. This is what he said. I didn't look at Ethan. I looked down. At my hands. The same hands that wiped Gregory's brow when he couldn't breathe. The same hands that signed his discharge forms. The same hands that he once held as he whispered, "Don't let him destroy it all." Ethan was pacing now. You're not even real family. You married into it. You don't have Harrington blood. You're just some woman who got lucky. I still said nothing. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew something he didn't. Mr. Clark reached under the table and pulled out a second envelope. Thicker. Darker. There's one more item, he said. A final letter. Gregory instructed me to read this aloud in your joint presence. He wrote it himself. And it begins like this. He unfolded the page. His voice softened. He began to read. Dear Linda and Ethan. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. And you're probably both surprised by something. Mr. Clark unfolded the letter with care. The kind of care you give to something written in the final stretch of a life. Not rushed. Not edited. Just raw. Real. He took a breath, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. Dear Linda and Ethan. If you're hearing this, then I've left this world behind. I don't know what you're feeling right now. Anger, sadness, confusion. Maybe all three. But I hope you'll hear me out anyway. Because what I'm about to say is not just about money. It's about truth. I didn't move. I could feel Ethan staring at the wall, arms crossed. Probably still trying to figure out how this all slipped through his fingers. How I slipped through. Ethan, you are my son. You carry my name. But a name is not a promise. A name is not a right. It is something you live up to. And in recent years, I've watched you trade that name for shortcuts. For schemes. For your pride. Mr. Clark didn't pause. He kept going. Even when Ethan scoffed under his breath. I hoped you would grow. I gave you chances. I cleaned up your messes. I told myself you were just young. But youth became habit. And habit became entitlement. And I can no longer reward entitlement just because it shares my blood. Ethan stood, paced once, then sat again. He didn't interrupt. But the air around him shifted. He was still listening. Even if he hated every word. Linda. I don't have enough pages to thank you. You were never loud. But you were always there. You were the reason our home felt like a home. You are the reason this company survived during the silent storms. You never asked for recognition. You gave everything quietly. And when I had nothing left, no strength, no pride, you still held my hand and said, "We'll figure it out." I closed my eyes. Just for a second. And in that second, I was back in that hospital chair. Holding Gregory's hand while the machines beeped and the world dimmed around us. You never wanted control. But I trust you to wield it. You never asked for power. But I trust you to protect it. Because you didn't marry me for my name. Or my assets. Or my empire. You loved me when all of it was falling apart. And that is why I leave it to you. Not to reward you. But to honor you. Ethan finally snapped. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. He was manipulated. He was sick. Mr. Clark looked up, calmly. This was written nearly 6 months before his passing. He was in full mental capacity, and the document is witnessed. Ethan didn't respond. He just slumped deeper into his chair, his eyes sharp but hollow. Like someone realizing the stage lights weren't coming on for him this time. "If you're angry, Ethan, I understand. But I hope one day you'll understand too. That love isn't earned through demands. Or legacy. But through the choices we make. I've made mine. Linda deserves the world. And you? You still have time to become the man I once hoped you'd be. But not with my help. Not anymore." The room fell into a silence I didn't dare disturb. Not even with breath. "Linda. If love had a form, it would look like the way you stood beside me when I had nothing left. I'm sorry I didn't say it enough. Now the world will see. Everything is yours. And whatever you choose to do with it. I trust you completely. With love. Gregory." Mr. Clark gently folded the letter. Ethan stared straight ahead, stone-faced. But his knuckles were white against the chair. He wanted to scream. To accuse. To throw something. But there was nothing left to throw. Nothing left to claim. Only the truth. And it didn't belong to him. I stood up slowly. My knees stiff. My heart not sure what it should be feeling. Grief. Relief. Gratitude. Or guilt. Maybe all of it at once. But one thing was certain. He had loved me. Truly. And now, the world knew it. Even the son who never looked me in the eye unless it was to remind me I didn't belong. Now he couldn't look at me at all. I stepped into the headquarters of Harrington Developments 2 weeks later. No veil. No widow black. Just me. Linda Harrington. Holding a leather folder with papers Ethan never thought I'd own. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt surreal. For 20 years, I had stayed on the lower levels. I knew every receptionist's birthday. Helped interns fix the coffee machine. But I never once set foot inside the boardroom. That wasn't my place. Until now. The doors opened with a soft ding. And there he was. Ethan. Leaning against the glass wall of the boardroom. Dressed in the same kind of suit he wore at the will reading. But now, a little tighter around the collar. He didn't speak when he saw me. Didn't smirk. Didn't mock. He just nodded and stepped aside. Like he'd been waiting. Like the game had started. And we both knew the rules had changed. Inside, the boardroom was silent. 8 seats around the table. Only 2 of us present. Mr. Clark had already arranged for my official transfer of shares. The board had been notified. And the voting rights, all mine now. I took my seat at the head of the table. It felt colder than I imagined. But heavier too. Weight meant something now. Ethan finally sat across from me. He didn't waste time. "You don't know how to run this," he said flatly. "You don't know real estate, or zoning laws, or tax strategy." "I know people," I said. "And I know you're 34 years old and haven't finished a single project without a legal complaint." His face twitched. A tiny thing. But I caught it. And he knew I did. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "There are other shareholders. You may own a majority, but I still have connections. 15% isn't enough to threaten me," I replied. "But it's enough to embarrass you if you keep pushing." "You wouldn't risk the brand," he challenged. "You'd never go public with what you know." I opened the folder. Laid a few pages on the table. Accounting records. Internal emails. A timeline of every favor Gregory called in to clean up Ethan's messes. "I won't go public," I said. "I'll go private. Straight to our clients. You know how quickly loyalty dies in this industry." Silence. Then something I didn't expect. He chuckled. "You've been watching all this time, haven't you?" he said. "Like a ghost. Like some quiet little mouse in the walls." I didn't answer. He stood up, hands on the table. "You were nothing," he hissed. "Just a woman he pitied. You think this makes you powerful?" I stood too. "No," I said. "This makes me visible." He walked out without another word. But I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Ethan didn't give up. He regrouped. He waited. He struck from shadows. Later that night, I got a message. Anonymous. But I knew it was him. You inherited a throne you don't know how to sit on. Let's see how long before it collapses under you. And that's when I knew. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to destroy everything, just so I wouldn't have it either. That week, I began making changes. Quietly. Deliberately. I replaced the CFO with someone I trusted, someone Gregory had mentored years ago. I opened a staff lunchroom on the first floor. I reinstated the scholarship fund that Ethan had quietly dissolved. And then I went home, sat in Gregory's chair, and began to read through the contracts he never had time to finish. One name kept coming up. A shell company tied to Ethan. And a massive development in the coastal wetlands, something that had been stalled due to environmental violations. Ethan had been trying to revive it behind my back. And now that I held the power, he needed my signature. He'd be back. He'd smile again. He'd charm. He'd beg. And I would be ready. Because the next time Ethan came to my door, he'd learn the truth. You don't get to bury someone in silence. And then fear what they become when they rise. Have you ever been underestimated, and then proven them all wrong? Let me know in the comments. And if you're ready to see how Ethan tries to get his revenge, don't forget to subscribe. He feared I'd sign something that would ruin him. What he didn't know is, I didn't need a pen. I had the truth. The knock on my door came at 9:04 a.m. Not a secretary. Not an assistant. Not an attorney. It was Ethan. Smiling like nothing had happened between us. Wearing the same tailored arrogance he was born into. Can we talk? He asked, as if we were civil. As if the past 2 months hadn't happened. As if he hadn't tried to bleed the company dry from the shadows. I let him in. He laid a folder on my desk, thicker than usual. Inside, I already knew, were documents about the Bay Point Coastal Project. The same stalled development Gregory had once warned me about. You know the city council's back on board, Ethan said smoothly. We fixed the compliance issues. With your approval, we can finally launch. He slid a page forward. The approval form. With one blank line at the bottom. Waiting for my signature. I didn't touch it. Just looked at him. And then reached for a drawer he didn't know was there. I pulled out another folder. Older. Worn. Stamped with Gregory's initials. Ethan's face lost a fraction of its color. I laid the folder next to his. Do you know what this is? I asked. He didn't respond. But his silence told me everything. This is the file Gregory gave me 6 months before he died, I said. Along with a note. Do not open it unless Ethan brings you something to sign. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents Gregory had gathered. Bank statements. Shell company records. Wire transfers tied to Ethan. All linked to the same coastal project he now wanted me to greenlight. You were planning this before your father died, I said. You were using his name to secure permits. You forged environmental studies. You bribed a zoning board member. Ethan tried to speak. But no words came out. Gregory didn't leave you out of the will to punish you, I said. He left you out because he knew this was coming. I handed him a letter. Gregory's final instruction. Written in his own hand. If Ethan ever brings this project to Linda, it means he hasn't changed. In that case, she has my full blessing to remove him from the company entirely. No settlement. No negotiation. Let the truth be his inheritance. Ethan's hands trembled as he held the letter. For the first time, he didn't look like a predator. He looked like a boy. Cornered. Unarmed. You can't do this, he said weakly. I'm still a shareholder. You're a non-voting shareholder, I corrected. And as of today, the ethics committee will be reviewing your conduct, which means you'll be suspended from all operations indefinitely. He tried one last thing. The last card he had left. Dad wouldn't want this. I looked him in the eye. Dad prepared this. That afternoon, the ethics committee met. I presented the documents. Ethan didn't show. By the end of the day, his access was revoked. His office cleaned out. His name, removed from all executive listings. And when he tried to file an injunction, he was met with a wall of signatures from employees who had waited years to speak up, because they knew I would listen. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no victory parade. I just sat in my office, the one he once said I'd never belong in, and stared out at the skyline my husband helped build. Weeks later, I founded a trust in Gregory's name to support women starting careers in architecture and engineering. It was the kind of legacy Gregory would have been proud of. One built on structure, integrity, foundation, not inheritance, but intention. And as for Ethan, the last I heard, he moved to Arizona, tried to start another firm. But people talk, and lies don't last long in rooms built on real names. You know, he used to say I was nothing, just the quiet woman who stood beside his father. But in the end, he had to come to me, ask me to sign something, beg me to hand him back the power he lost. What he feared most wasn't what I'd sign, but what I wouldn't, because I didn't need a pen. I had the truth. Would you have done the same if you were in my place? Tell me in the comments.